time now is 8 o'clock here in New Delhi. You're watching India Prime. The big discussions tonight stretch all across India, from Jammu and Kashmir to Tamil Nadu. But first, let's take a look at the headlines. AIADMK leader TTV Dinakaran is booked in a bribery case to the Election Commission. A police report has now been registered against him. Turkey's main opposition calls for an annulment of the recent referendum after Recep Tayyip Erdogan gets victory. Presidential politics: stop using proxies who indulge in violence, says Trump's national security advisor H.R. McMaster, signifying Washington's growing impatience with Pakistan. Well, all options are on the table, according to U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, as he warns North Korea against any misadventure. And the United States dropped an inert nuclear bomb over the Nevada desert during a test last month, according to media reports. What do we make of it? Welcome, everyone. Those stories later on, but first, the big discussion. Just when you thought you had seen it all from Jammu and Kashmir in India. The stone pelting, the beatings, the assault on soldiers, and a lost future, there is much more. Earlier today, school children as well in uniform, well, they were caught on camera pelting stones at security forces. Soon after, the Jammu and Kashmir University ordered the closure of universities across the state. The future of the entire state is now at stake. There are many facets to the Kashmir questions and so few answers. So what do we know? One, that Jammu and Kashmir is suffering. Its population is in the grip of a conspiracy hatched by those who have no stake in its future. Also, the question of human rights cannot ignore the plight of those in uniform. First, a look at the report.
Events in India's state of Jammu and Kashmir are going the way of previous summers. Security forces and Kashmiris indoctrinated and brainwashed to hate India are facing off over two controversial videos that have surfaced over the past week. One shows Kashmiri youth abusing and manhandling uniformed troops as they walk past. The troops do not respond. The other is that of a man tied to the bonnet of a jeep being driven at high speed through a street. There is outrage over the video of the jeep, with one accusation being that the army was using an innocent man as a human shield to protect the passengers of the jeep. The army is investigating. But what about the disturbing visuals of Kashmiri youth abusing, pushing and even raining blows on the troops as they walk past? Expectedly, there is widespread silence. Clearly, the concept of human rights is reserved for Kashmiris. Anyone in uniform, whether they pull a weapon or not, simply does not qualify as a human being. Stone throwing as a method to attack troops has its origins in the Israel-Palestine conflict. But Israel treats stone throwing as a potentially lethal crime and awards up to 2 years in jail to the guilty. The Indian Armed Forces, already under flak for a controversial Special Powers Act, are reluctant to take the same step and further antagonize the local population. India invests heavily in Kashmir and must yet face hatred instilled in the locals, primarily by neighbouring Pakistan and Kashmir's own extremists. So much for the talk of human shields and human rights. It is primarily Kashmir's children and young adults who are being taught to hate India from their early years onwards. To thousands of tourists who were flocking to the beautiful valley over several years of peace, this will be just another summer. They'll go elsewhere. But to Kashmir's children, whose schools often remain shut due to riots and curfews, outside interference and relentless brainwashing means that this, like several others, will be yet another lost summer of the best years of their life. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, to get a perspective on this story, let's go to WION's correspondent Pratish Dubey joining us from the WION newsroom. Pratish, thanks for joining us. First of all, what motivates young people to simply just throw away their futures? We see those dramatic images, those visuals that are haunting. Why is this the case?
Well, there cannot be a simple answer to this, but one answer that experts from all sides will agree upon is that there's definitely a conspiracy, there's a provocation, some of these have been led astray, and a lot of this cannot only be blamed in Pakistan, but extremists residing within Kashmir, those elements who have absolutely no stake in Kashmir's future, because if they did have, then they would be there to protect these children's futures. Now all these two, both these units, they come together, and there's a systematic sort of propaganda that's been done against the Indian state, so much so that for perhaps the first time in more than a decade we saw low turnout when it came to elections, and there can be only two reasons for that, Archit. One, either the threat of militancy was so high that people were afraid to come out of their homes and do it, or the fact that they had lost confidence in the local politicians. So no one can alone shoulder the blame, but it has definitely to be shared by all these elements.
Pratish, let's also talk about the situation there on the ground. We've seen so many different cases there with people being tied up there, an army officer tied up. We saw the situation with the stone pelters. I mean, where do we see this sort of all manifesting itself? Is the situation going to get worse before it gets better? And what really needs to be done at this point to sort of alleviate the problems there in Jammu and Kashmir?
Some of those answers, I'm sure, when Major General Sheru Thapliyal joins us, he'll be able to talk further on that. But on two other aspects that you raised, specifically the issue of that video that surfaced, and that was in fact first tweeted out by Farooq Abdullah and then his son Omar Abdullah, both former chief ministers, who condemned such an action. Now that condemnation will perhaps be shared across the spectrum. A lot of political parties have gone ahead and said that, listen, this can't be condoned. But at the same time, the government of India has backed, in many ways, its army by saying that, listen, these are people who are thrown into an unusual circumstance and they're doing the best they can. And to back that, we have had several other videos. We've seen that one visual where a CRPF official who's on election duty, while he's armed, he's fully armed and he can retaliate, he refuses to do so. Meanwhile, he's heckled, people are throwing stones at him, and he doesn't resort to any kind, he doesn't give in to any kind of provocation, he maintains his cool. So definitely there's that aspect of it. The fact that Government of India is saying that, listen, we understand that this is an extraordinary situation that's happening on the ground. While we don't condone it, we cannot punish every action that the army does when it's trying to think out of the box and try and explain away a situation that's just happened on the ground at that moment. So of course it will require special understanding to really come to grips with what's happening in Kashmir and why, and the entire truth of that video we'll have to wait and watch while that comes out. On the other hand, let's just take a look at the major stakeholders in Kashmir, and we are talking about its political class. There has not been a united front, while the PDP government, which shares power with the BJP in the state, has come out and said that, listen, there are human rights violation of stone pelters. Now they're advising more restraint to the armed forces, but one must bear in mind the armed forces have been pushed to their limits. The armed forces they really perhaps at the last stretch of their patience, and the reason for this really is that when it comes to the question of human rights, one only speaks about the other side, and the view from those who are also victims of human rights in any other form except the fact that they are in uniform must also be considered.
All right, Pratish, thank you for those perspectives. Now, let's actually go to Major General Sheru Thapliyal with regards to that. Thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you, sir, is what motivates some of these young people there in Jammu and Kashmir to do what we've been seeing them doing, throwing stones and really throw away their futures?
You see, the problem in Jammu and Kashmir is that too much of leeway is being given to these stone pelters and too little to the armed forces. If these fellows have human rights, so do the armed forces. Why isn't that being considered? And I personally feel that BJP has made a great mistake by aligning itself with the PDP and forming a government there. Their ideologies do not match at all. So just because they wanted to have a say in the governance, which in any case is nil in the J&K. Sorry?
My question to you also with regards to a military perspective, how surprised are you? How surprised are you by the situation there on the ground, and what really, in your opinion, do you think has gone wrong for the level to become as bad as it is now, with the stone pelters, the children, and just the horrific situation there on the ground?
Situation has become bad because in the initial stages these stone pelters were not handled with sufficient force. In any case, it is beyond the present government of PDP to rectify the situation. So in my view, the need of the hour is to impose the governor's rule in J&K so that law and order and law of the land can be enforced there. That is the casualty, the law of the land. And everybody is, sympathizing with the stone pelters, which I'm really amazed.
Let me also ask you about the area there on the ground. It is peak season there in Kashmir. Lot of tourism there. How are such situations on the ground there? How is that going to affect the livelihoods of those people who live there, given all the fighting happening there on the ground?
Yes, it's bad news for tourism industry. But then who's to control it? The armed forces and the security forces are trying their best. They are so restrained in their response, nothing more that they can do. So imposing the governor's rule will automatically impose caution on these stone pelters, and things are bound to improve. So that is the need of the hour. That must be done. Unless that is done, I am afraid situation in J&K is not going to improve.
All right. Let me now go to Nimesh Desai. He is joining us. He's the director of the Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences, joining us over the phone. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to really quickly get your perspective about what the situation is and why children so young are being trained to hate and do the acts that we are seeing them do, pelting stones and really perpetuating violence. What motivates them to really just throw away their futures? Nimesh.
Hi, good evening. It's the vulnerability and the easy prey that children and adolescents are. But what also seems in today's story that you're discussing is the base nature of human society that seems to manifest itself at its worst in such situations. Conflict situations and wars often lead to base elements coming out, but it seems like this is a new low. It's really unfortunate that youth should be used as shields. This is something that actually is not even known too well, except for a few international situations.
And what about even for the people on the ground, their livelihoods? I mean, it has peaked tourism there, people coming there. So this is impacting the people there on the ground in more ways than one, not just the children and not just those people who are being used as shields or being trained to hate, but even for the rest of the people in Jammu and Kashmir. The amount of tourists that typically would go there perhaps are not going to. I mean,
yes,
is there
totally.
any thought even being given to them?
Yes, totally. One is the influence on. See, there are 2 or 3 levels at which we can possibly talk about it.
Right.
One is the other young people in the valley or in such areas, and what impact they will have. I mean, some of them, unfortunately, will only get more emboldened or get courageous enough, as they would see, to participate in such events. The larger population in the local area is only likely to have polarization, whichever side of the opinion they are in. And certainly the population outside that area doesn't get encouraged to visit there. So that obviously will affect the tourism, as you're saying, and everything else. But so at all levels, this is really unfortunate. Can one hold any one party responsible? Objectively, scientifically, possibly not, because this is the negative downward spiral that human behavior leads to, especially in conflict situations. And what we often keep talking about is this is the time when you need time out and healing. Not to make a political comment, but how and when that will happen is something that we'll have to see, and who can do that. But this is what in social behavioral science has been called as negative downward spiral.
All right, let me now go back to Major General Sheru Taplial with regards to the situation with the children. I mean, it seems, at least from what we can observe, children are taught to perhaps hate India from an early age. Why is that the case, and who is to blame ultimately?
See, all these stone pelters are being paid money to throw stones at the behest of Pakistan by the separatists. So unless you get hold of the separatists, and we must be the only country in the world where separatists are given security by the government and finances by the government. So how can you run a state like this? And nothing is being done to withdraw security of the separatists. If they are not happy with India, let them go to Pakistan. But to give them security and give them finances, I think it is absolutely unacceptable. Why the government of India doesn't take action on this, I am really amazed.
All right, thank you to both of our guests with regards to this discussion. We appreciate your time. With that, a quick break here on India Prime. Another discussion about Tamil Nadu politics on the other side. We'll be right back.